Ilan Mui writes regarding financial issues for the Washington Post and joins us today to talk about new credit card rules. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Last week you had an article with the headline, Fed Caps Late Fees for Credit Card Payments. Tell us what that's all about.
Right, so the Federal Reserve issued some new rules over the past week that set new regulations on how much your credit card company can charge you when you violate the terms of your contract, either by having a late payment, maybe by spending more than you should be spending because you've overdrawn your credit limit. And what that does is it sets a $25 cap on any penalty fee that your credit card may charge you for the first time that you violate the terms of your contract. If you have a second violation within 6 billing cycles, the cap is now $35. And that's a real change from previously, when credit card companies frequently would charge maybe $35, $36, $37 for some of these late payments and for these over-limit fees.
Why did the Fed feel the need to cap these late fees?
Well, they had to. Last year, Congress passed the Credit Card Act, which instituted a whole wave of reforms around the ways that credit card companies could address interest rates and around the ways that they could address fees that they charged you for violating the contract. So part of what the law required was that the Federal Reserve look at these penalty fees and determine what is a reasonable rate for these fees. And the Fed just issued their rules finally around that last week.
Give us an example of what an unreasonable fee would have been before this law went into effect.
Frequently, folks might have made a late payment. You know, they might have been just 1 day late or so on their payment, and the Federal Reserve said, you know, now that fee can only be $25 or $35, where previously it might have been a little bit more than that. In addition, what the Federal Reserve said is that the fee cannot exceed the amount of the violation. So they're capped at $25, $35, but on top of that, if you, let's say, go over your spending limit by $2 by purchasing a cup of coffee, your fee cannot exceed that $2 over limit spending. So they really said that people are getting mad because they're just making a small violation, but they're getting hit with a big penalty, and they want to restore some balance to that.
We're talking about new credit card rules with Ilan Mui of the Washington Post, and if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, by all means, give us a call, 202-737-0001 for Republicans, Democrats 202-737-0002, and Independents 202-628-0205. So what's the response been so far from the banking and credit industry on this?
Well, they knew this was coming down the pipeline, so obviously they're saying that this is something that they understand, that they are ready to deal with, and that they're ready to handle. Certainly now that the regulations have been put in place, they're not complaining too much about them. However, what they have said is that there's going to be trade-offs. That if their fees are being capped and their revenue is being capped in one area, that might mean they're going to have to make it up at another place. And we've seen that by credit card issuers maybe reinstituting annual fees on certain cards, maybe raising interest rates for even payers who are in good standing, so that some way this money is going to be made up.
Another thing that you've been writing about and was in the Post on Thursday, June 10th, is swipe fees. Tell us, what are swipe fees and why are those in the news today, or this week?
Yeah, swipe fees are something that sounds very simple, but in actuality, like everything, it's very complicated. So what is being called swipe fees, or more technically is called interchange fee, is a fee that the card processors such as Visa and MasterCard charge on behalf of credit card issuers every time you use your debit or credit card at a retailer. The retailer then pays, each time you get a swipe, the retailer pays a small fee, roughly about 2% of the purchase price, to banks as a sort of thank you for accepting your card. Now, this is obviously something that merchants do not want to pay. For small dollar purchases in particular, using your credit card or your debit card to buy a piece of gum or to buy, again, that cup of coffee, they're saying that sometimes this can eat into their profits and actually make that purchase unprofitable for them. So they've been fighting this for a very long time, and Senator Durbin offered an amendment to the Financial Regulatory Reform Bill that would direct the Federal Reserve once again to take a look at these fees and determine, are they actually reasonable and proportional to the costs that are actually incurred in this transaction.
So has action been taken on the swipe fees yet, or is this just something that they're still looking at?
Well, the Senate has approved the amendment to the Financial Reg Reform Bill. They've approved Senator Durbin's amendment, and right now, actually, the House and the Senate are working to reconcile the two versions of the bill: the version that passed in the Senate that includes the swipe fee amendment, and the version in the House that does not include the swipe fee amendment.
Let's go to the phones. Our first call for Ilan Mui comes from Buffalo, New York, on our line for Republicans. Lucille, go ahead.
Yes, I have a credit card from Bank of America, and I look at just to pay the bills. I don't want their advertisements, and come to find out they were charging me, and this is since January, 46%. Right on there. Every time I buy anything, it's $46 or 46%. I mean, this has gotten to the point where people are trying to get rid of their cards, and they probably won't use them anymore.
Lucille, your interest rate. Lucille, I just want to make sure I understand this, that the interest rate on your credit card purchases is 46%?
Yes.
Well, I have two pieces of news for you that maybe you'll find helpful. One thing that the Federal Reserve also is directing credit card companies to do is to reevaluate any rate increases that have gone into effect since the beginning of the year to determine whether or not those rate increases are actually warranted. So your credit card company should be looking at that 46% interest rate and perhaps making a readjustment to that. The other thing that I should tell you is that credit card companies are now prohibited from raising rates on existing balances. So what that means is that if you do not charge anything else to this credit card and you keep it as it is, the credit card company cannot raise the rate on that balance that you already have outstanding, so that it won't go any higher than 46% if you stop charging purchases to that card. So those are some things to consider. You may also want to consider, at the 46% interest rate, if you can do it, a balance transfer or something along those lines to try to get that rate down.
Do the credit card companies say that they need to charge this 46% interest rate, or are they just doing it because they can get away with it?
Well, I don't know if they would say they need to charge 46% interest rate, but they do say that they need to charge higher interest rates because their revenue is being limited in other areas. I've seen some analyst reports that say that all of these changes to credit card interest rates and penalty fees can cost the industry as much as $11 billion. So obviously there is revenue that is being limited. They say they want to make it up. Now, whether or not they really need to make it up or whether or not they can deal with a little less profit, you'll have to ask them.
Next up, Baltimore, Maryland, Mike on our line for Independence. Go ahead, Mike.
Yes, hello. I want to thank you for C-SPAN. My question, I'm not really too familiar with the whole credit card thing, but from what a commercial I heard before, the commercial was something like if you got credit card bills and they're pretty high, we'll erase the credit debt for you or something like that. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Well, there are a number of programs that you can use to help reduce your credit card debt, especially if you are in a position where it's just become unmanageable. What I would say to you, I don't know the size of your debt, and you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but what I would say to you is the most important thing that any credit card expert or personal finance expert will tell you is to keep making payments, to keep making as much as you can, paying as much as you can toward that balance, because the last thing that you want is for that payment to go into collections and for you to be in an even worse situation. But there are a number of agencies, there are credit counseling agencies that are involved that can help you figure out how to manage your debt. But there's actually a lot of controversy around that because obviously there are some unsavory businesses out there, and there's a lot of controversy right now particularly around debt settlement companies. So I would encourage you to do your research around which companies are offering what kind of deals and make sure you're working with a legitimate firm.
Santa Monica, California on our line for Republicans. You're on the Washington Journal.
Morning, Jan. I got a quick story here for you that could be helpful to your viewers. I owed about 10 grand on my Chase and my B of A card, and both of them marketed to me a very low interest rate teaser for 6 months and said, hey, just cash these checks, it'll be a 2% rate for 6 months. I sold some securities to pay off amounts that I owed both of those card companies so I could free up the balance to take advantage of the teaser rate. And as soon as I did it, both banks, B of A and Chase, said, hey, thanks for paying us off. I tried cashing the checks, and they both said, by the way, we've reduced your line of credit from $15,000 to $500. And my FICO score is still as high as it's always been. My credit's good. I'm just a small businessman here in the U.S., you know. And both of them said, hey, we just looked at your debt profile, and you had a little too much debt. And I understand they're tightening, but they have no right to market those checks to people and then bounce them and throw them into disarray when they're small business people.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So they lowered your limit after you'd already tried to use the checks, so the checks were no longer any good?
He's already been disconnected.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Let's assume that he said yes.
Okay, well, one thing that credit card companies have been doing is that they have been reducing rates because they found that there are many risky customers in their portfolios, and that was many of them were defaulting or becoming delinquent on their loans, and so that was causing them to lose quite a bit of money and to help spur some of the problems in consumer lending that we've been seeing. You know, I would say that there may have been some delay in the time that he got the checks and the time that he actually tried to catch them. So maybe there was some reduction of credit limit there. But I know that has been a big problem that many small business owners have complained about, seeing their credit limits dramatically decrease as credit card companies try to mitigate the risk.
Is there anything happening either in Capitol Hill or in state legislatures that will help ameliorate this situation?
Well, one thing that the Credit Card Act does is that it sets a time limit on promotional teaser rates that I believe that they must exist for something like 6 months. So that previously they might have a teaser rate that might last just a couple of months or may only last 8 weeks or something like that, so that it gives the consumer a little bit more time to be confident that this is the rate that I'm going to be paying before any changes are made.
And is there anything in this legislation that defines how far you can go over and above that teaser rate once the time limit expires? So let's say in this gentleman's case, I believe he had a 2% interest rate for 6 months. Is there anything that says, well, after that 6 months, you can't automatically jack it up to the 46% that the earlier caller had?
There isn't, actually, and that's one of the things that consumer advocates say is a shortcoming of some of this regulation, that there is no sort of proportionality when it comes to interest rate increases. It limits when they can do it, but doesn't necessarily limit how much they can do it.
We're going back to the phone, Chicago, Illinois, on our line for Democrats. Jan, you're on with Ilan Mui of the Washington Post.
Good morning, C-SPAN.
Good morning.
I went out of town about a month ago, and I sort of overspent on my Bank of America card. And I think I was like a negative $1.50. So I really didn't pay any attention to it. I'd forgotten about it. A few days passed by, and I noticed they had a $35 overdraft fee. And I was upset because I said, $35 for $1.50? I mean, come on. And I almost wasn't able to get it taken off, but I told them, I said, well, I don't normally go over my balance or whatever. But they took it off, and I said, I thought they passed a law where if it's $1.50, it won't be $35. So are you saying now that there won't be $35 fees for $1.50 anymore?
Actually, you unfortunately just missed the implementation of the law. The law goes into effect on July 1st for all new accounts and into August 15th for existing accounts. And basically what it says is that if you want to participate in overdraft, then you have to opt into that service. If you don't want to participate in overdraft, then the bank will simply decline your card if you do not have enough money in your account to pay for the purchase. Many banks have started implementing some of this, and I'm surprised to actually hear that you had an issue with Bank of America because they already started rolling out some of these programs. But July 1st is really the beginning of the implementation of these new regulations.
Next up, another call from Chicago. This time it's Marina on our line for Independence. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. The thing that really bothers me about the credit cards is that merchants are evidently forced to, they can't charge a different price for cash purchases when in fact, so all of us are paying for people that use credit cards. And it used to be when credit cards first came out, you were charged more for the privilege of using a credit card. And then somehow the credit cards were able to put into their contracts with the merchants that the merchants were not allowed to inform people that the price for a cash purchase was less. And I just think that there's a real longness to that, and it's basically dishonest practice.
The Durbin Amendment that passed in the Senate that's being considered right now between both houses actually allows retailers to offer a discount for different forms of payment. So they could offer a discount if you paid by cash. They could offer a certain discount if you paid by check. Some merchants say that they actually already have this ability, that Visa and MasterCard and the payment networks allow them to do this, but few merchants actually do because it's kind of a headache. But certainly that is the case. It is cheaper for the retailer if you pay with cash or you pay with check as opposed to using a credit card, particularly one that might have a rewards program attached to it. If you go overseas and you shop at in other countries, you might find that they do offer these discounts. So there is some precedent for it out there, and the Durbin Amendment is one way that they're trying to address this.
On Sunday, May 30th, you wrote, recently glimmers of a new, more fiscally responsible consumer have emerged. The number of late payments on credit cards dropped to a 6-month low in March, according to Fitch Ratings. The personal savings rate has recovered to 3.6% after falling for 2 months. American Express says more customers are making more than the minimum payment and paying off their debt faster. The nation's outstanding credit card debt has fallen by about $100 billion over the past year. It seems like these stiff penalties were getting people to make their payments, and now that the penalties are going to be less, will we see a relaxing among the consumers on getting their payments made on time or going beyond their credit limits?
That's a really interesting question, and it's actually something that the Fed tried to address. So as the Fed was crafting its regulations around the caps on the penalty fees, they tried to really sort of strike a balance, at least they say they started trying to strike a balance, between not putting an onerous fee on consumers, again, that $40 fee for the $2 cup of coffee, but at the same time realizing that part of the penalty is that it's a deterrent, right? And knowing that you may be facing this big fee, you may not do that action. So that is actually something that they are trying to balance.
Next up, Colorado Springs, April on our line for Democrats. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. My situation was I had a Sears card, and apparently you could purchase an item. That particular item, you could go 1 year with no interest. And we tried real hard and almost had it paid off. But what was very interesting is that there were other purchases in between, and when that contract period ended, it went from 12% to 29% with no reason. My question is, with this bill they've passed, why did they allow the credit card companies a whole year to upset everyone's lifestyle? So now I can barely afford, because the minimum payments have raised, I can barely afford to make payments now. And if I didn't have help, I would definitely be out of my home just to pay the credit cards due to the fees. And every single card just jumped within that year. Why didn't they grandfather this?
April, let me ask you this. You knew when you signed on to use this credit card that these fees were going to go up in a year, right?
No, not the interest rate. The balance was really small.
But you didn't know the interest rate?
They changed the entire interest rate. I knew they would charge the interest on the unpaid balance, but they increased the interest rate as well.
But that wasn't spelled out to you before you signed up for the credit card?
No. It was the minute the government said, we're going to put you guys in check, every single card for over a 2-month, 3-month period start raising their interest rates.
Okay. Thanks for your call.
Yeah, so there actually were some legislative attempts to sort of speed up the implementation of the law. The law passed last spring, and we're just still now getting to some of the regulations and how that's going to be playing out. And there were some attempts by lawmakers to say, hey, this is taking way too long. We want credit card companies to make these changes now. Obviously, the industry says these are huge changes, sweeping reforms that we haven't seen, perhaps even in the history of credit cards, and we need time to make it work within our systems. So there was, again, that balancing act between lawmakers saying consumers need this relief now and credit card companies saying, you know, we want to push this out, we need time to actually comply with the law. But there were many stories of credit card companies, again, raising rates on different cards in advance of the law, because it will become more difficult for them to raise those rates after the law took effect.
Ilan Mouis began her career as a obit writer at the Times-Picayune and has been with the Washington Post since 2002. She is a financial reporter there and also teaches journalism at the University of Maryland in College Park. Next up, Cincinnati, Ohio, on our line for Republicans. Maureen, go ahead.
Yes, I just had a comment. It's kind of interesting to me that our government makes decisions as to private industry and what they can charge or not charge, and never placing the responsibility on the consumer. I mean, I have credit cards, and throughout my life, I make sure that I have the money to pay for it. We seem to foster this idea that it's owed to people to go out and buy things that they can't afford. Then when they get in trouble, everybody else pays for it. We all do. Whatever happens out there when individuals, go ahead of themselves for their own personal, if it's a need for food, that's one thing. But, we're living in this society where we got to have everything today. It wasn't like that 30 years ago. You did without so you could afford it. Now we're in this messy situation, as well as the government. They do the same thing, only they just take it. And all of a sudden they're in debt because they're using beyond their means. And yet we still don't put the responsibility towards the consumer. I just don't understand how people can think that's correct, or I didn't read the paper, or you can be sure, Glenn, that lady that just indicated she didn't know. I bet you if she went back and read the contract, she would find out that they had that in there. It's their responsibility to know these things. I mean, I've gone over before, maybe, or made a late payment 1 month. And because my credit is good, I call. They'll waive the fee, and at least one time. So you have to stay on top of things, and if you're spending beyond your means, then you're going to suffer the consequences.
Maureen, before I let you go, what would you say is a reasonable fee for going over your limit or being late on a payment?
I really, I would hate to see myself, get to that point. I just won't allow it. It's like speeding. I don't want to pay a ticket. There are just things that we have to be, within ourselves. Just people of, I don't know, just dignified people that do the right thing and understand. Certainly, I know people that have 10 credit cards. They just keep buying and they keep whatever. In the end, everybody pays. Nobody looks at that.
Thanks for your call.
Yeah, I think what that you'll find is that frequently people don't learn a lesson until something bad happens to them, and that's part of what we're seeing happening now is that folks got dinged. Either they got the late payments or they had some trouble with their credit card, and now they're realizing a negative savings rate isn't going to cut it, that we need to put more money away, that we need to be more fiscally responsible. And the real question, though, I think is that right now that's sort of the mood among consumers, right, to be frugal and to be fiscally responsible. But how long is that really going to last, and how much is this really changing consumer behavior long term?
Next up, Mary on our line for Independence from Dayton, Ohio. You're on the Washington Journal.
Hi. I'm actually a realist. I'm looking at the banking industry as a culprit for financial oppression to your average American consumer. And, we can all dance around saying, like the lady who just spoke, people who live beyond their means, they should read their disclosure statements. And no, all these products are designed, these financial products are designed for your average consumer to prey upon your average consumer. And, and I think that a lot of the money that's generated from this is actually given to CEO bonuses and shareholders' concerns, not for the welfare of the average American to make ends meet. You know, when they advertise free checking, that's designed for people who are uneducated in this banking, financial, unethical industry to go. They know these people are eventually going to bounce a check or this kind of a thing, and these fees are going to. This is a fee-based, prey upon consumer world, and I mean American. And I just, like I said, I'm a realist, and I think that all this rhetoric and all this bespeak trying to make the consumer the ultimate person of responsibility is wrong and should be addressed.
Mary, from your perspective, what's the solution to this problem?
Well, first of all, Elizabeth Warren, the Harvard law professor who's in the oversight committee for TARP, she is someone to listen to. She is an authority on this subject. And I would say consumer protection, like they have this Federal Reserve finally, is doing some cracking down because, you know, the general American person is becoming aware. They're waking up. So, yeah, the consumer protection laws, and they actually, the third-party agencies who are looking over these regulators probably need another agency to look after them as well. I think there's be a lot of checks and balances, and maybe this America can be salvaged.
Ylan Mui.
Well, they are certainly debating that very issue right now. Again, as part of the financial regulatory reform bill, one of the things that they're looking at is creating a consumer financial protection agency, or perhaps bureau, depending on where it's housed, that is dedicated to protecting consumers around these financial issues, drafting these types of regulations, offering these kinds of recommendations. And as the caller actually just seemed to sort of suggest, one of the people whose name has been floated as leading this organization is actually Elizabeth Warren. So, you know, this is obviously something that Congress is looking at. Again, we'll see where it finally ends up at the end of the day.
Your assessment, you mentioned the House and Senate conferees have been working this past week on the financial regulatory reform. Give us your assessment of what they've accomplished so far this week, and sort of preview for us what we might expect to see when they come back and pick up on this next week.
Well, the scope of the entire reg reform bill is a little bit beyond my purview, but what I will tell you is that one of the things that has been hotly debated is this interchange and swipe fee issue. I know that that's scheduled to come up during the conference on Tuesday, and it's something that has been very hotly debated. There have been lobbyists swarming the Hill, and there have been even appeals by folks such as Bob Johnson and Russell Simmons weighing in on this debate. You might be surprised that they would. So, you know, I think that, you know, hopefully by early next week, we might at least have some beginnings of answers around some of the sticking points.
And we want to remind our viewers and listeners that C-SPAN has been covering the conference meetings all of last week. You can find the information on our website, as well as the schedule for next week. We'll be covering that next week as well. The details are on our website, cspan.org. Next up, Cincinnati, Ohio, Geraldine, on our line for Democrats. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you doing?
Fine, go ahead.
Good morning, young lady. Good morning, young lady. I live on the west side of town. I read my financial information as well, and I'm retired, 30-year state employee. However, I had a heart attack earlier this year, and I only had one card, Capital One, and I wasn't able to make the payment, and actually I was more worried about my life than anything else. At any rate, within a span of 30 to 60 days, they went from a $39 overdraft overdraft fee, and other fees. They added up to $212 from that January to the end of that February. And that's when I decided, I frankly told them that I had not signed up for financial rape. And as it stands right now, my only comment is I told them I'm willing to go to court because I think there are some fine points of this bill, regardless of what anyone says about the Balancing Act. Life is reality, and things come into play. And I think there are some things that Congress missed, and I think there are some things that the credit card companies were able to get their way about. And I think we need to look at it again. Thank you.
Ylan Mui of the Washington Post.
Sure. If I understood the question correctly, she was talking about sort of a snowballing of overdraft fees as opposed to credit card fees. If that is the case, what I will say is that some banks have begun limiting that snowball effect, right? So they're saying that if you were overdrawn on your account, they're putting a cap on the times that you can be pinged for overdrawing your account in one day. And that cap sometimes may be about four times per day. So there is some recognition that, that these fees can add up to be much larger than the original penalty. And some consumer advocates have said that the Fed has not gone far enough in addressing that issue.
She also mentioned that she would be willing to go to court in order to fight what she felt was a disservice or an injustice. Are there prospects of more court challenges as a result of the action that's been taken by Congress?
I have not heard of a groundswell of legal challenges to some of these practices. What I've heard more is from folks who have turned to outside groups. Again, there's some of the credit counseling groups or debt settlement groups or debt management groups, and dealing with those groups and trying to grapple with their debt and some of the concerns around those practices.
What about on the other side? Is there any prospect that banks or businesses may go to the courts and say the government can't determine how much we charge? This is out of their field of responsibility, and we want that taken away from them.
I would say largely this is something that they've accepted. When the regulations began taking effect over the course of this year, the banks issued statements saying, we are ready for this new day for consumers, and we are ready to help them make better financial decisions. So they've accepted that this is the new reality. What I will say, though, is that around the interchange or swipe fees, there are currently court battles that are being fought between Visa and MasterCard and the retailers. They're still winding their way through the system.
Next up on our line for Republicans, Linda from Colston, Texas. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just want to say that I think that financial bill was totally incorrect. Now, I've been on both sides of the credit issues. At one time, I wouldn't even want to look at my credit score. But when this bill went through, I had a very nice credit score with very nice interest rate. And thanks to that financial bill, all my credit, one went up from 9.9 to 16.5. And at a time when the only thing I used my credit card for was paying doctor bills and taxes. And I think you did the 80% that weren't being hit a big disservice by passing that bill. And of course, when my credit interest rates started going up, I just started canceling cards. But it really made it hard, considering I had just been diagnosed with cancer and had major hospital bills coming through.
Linda, before we let you go, as you were canceling these cards, what kind of incentives were those companies giving you to either stay with them, or what kind of incentives were you getting from new companies to go and use their credit cards?
Absolutely none. Absolutely none. The employee that I talked to would go to a manager, but the manager would say, well. So I've canceled all but one, and it had a variable rate, so not my favorite card, but I'm not totally without a card. Now, that's not to say just recently I got one where if you pay it off within a year, then you pay zero interest rate. Of course, the minute that zero goes, it's 29%.
We'll leave it there.
Yeah, that is something that we've heard as a complaint, especially among consumers who are in good standing in terms of their credit, that previously under the old system, credit card companies charged a very low interest rate if you were a good customer and a very high interest rate if you were a bad customer and missing payments. Now that's sort of leveling off, and so those people who were the riskiest customers no longer having those really high fees. But the trade-off is that those people who are better customers have to pay a little bit more. And the banks will say that is a trade-off that Congress is willing to make.
Next up, Statesville, North Carolina. Thomas on our line for Independence. Go ahead.
Morning. Thanks for taking my call this morning. I've got a comment on the recent passing of that bill. Really, the only thing really wrong with it was the fact that the time and the fact that it got enacted, took effect, I should say. It should have took effect as soon as it was signed, and a lot of these raising of these high fees of all these credit cards wouldn't have happened. But also, too, I had found out recently, a couple of years ago, that at the point of transaction with credit cards and debit cards at retailers, I didn't know that the retailer was taking care of having to pay for that transaction themselves, and as well as the rewards as well on those cards. And could you explain to me why that's been put on the retailer and not, say, the card holder or the card issuer themselves? Thank you.
Sure. That has typically been the way that the system works, and the reason is because retailers sort of paid a fee for accepting a Visa card or a MasterCard or for accepting a credit card. And now that has become a very significant source of revenue for banks and for card issuers. The fees can range anywhere. There's a whole schedule of fees that's very complicated, and they can range anywhere from about 1% on some transactions to I've seen as high as 5% of the purchase price on other transactions. Again, as you said, this is something that retailers have fought for a very long time. They fought to lower them, and this is something that, especially as they see other forms of revenue become more limited, that banks are fighting to make sure that they keep.
And there was another part of his statement or his question. Is there any explanation as to why there was that time period from when the law was signed to when it actually went into effect? Was that to give people a chance to adjust things?
Right. Well, you know, the banking industry would say they need time to comply. They need time to reconfigure their risk models, alert their customers of the changes, etc. You know, some lawmakers argue that they didn't need that much time, right? And so that some of that may have been some compromise between the banking industry and the lawmakers.
Next up from Redding, California, on our line for Democrats. Darren, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for C-SPAN. On this new credit card rules and stuff, I've probably been from one end of the credit side to the other end of the credit side, and I've pretty much figured out if you use cash and just keep your credit card for just in case, it seems to work out better.
Yeah, that's certainly something that a lot of folks are doing, that we've seen retailers report. Walmart will say that they've seen the number of cash payments has increased as folks try to balance their budgets a little bit better.
Our last call for Ilan Mui comes from Manhattan on our line for Independence. Jack, you're up.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. A general thesis, I'll say to you, and then if you can just bear with me, I have the evidence about it. My opinion is that several of these issuers just charge these charges indiscriminately, and if you specifically list they can't do this or they can't do that, they find some other little loophole to do it until you specifically say they can't do that. And that most people with a balance and a job, and you can't hold on the phone to argue it for 15 minutes, it just goes into the wash and they don't notice the charge. Myself in construction, and these are poor times, living from check to check, I see when they take that money, I call up, I do hold, I argue, and I've gotten all these charges back. And I think they bet on the fact that most people won't do that. Specifically, I have one bank that has issued me 2 cards. One is for the direct deposit of my paycheck when I get paid. One is for the direct deposit of unemployment when I'm not working. Some of the charges they'll put on the one that I directly deposit my paycheck in, and I'm responsible for those charges. I can do the exact same transactions, and they won't put those charges on this New York State issued card because it would be noticed by them. Specifically, if I have $40 in my card and I charge 20 at a third bank and I charge another 20 at a third bank, it'll give me 40 of the 40, and the next day post a $3 charge and a $3 charge, I'll go -6 and have a $35 charge. On the state issue card, where they wouldn't let it go negative, they'll give you the first 20 and not give you the second 20 because they don't want to argue with the state when they hold all that float in the state's money. I brought that up to them, and Chase Bank acknowledged they do indeed program those two cards differently. I think that's unconscionable.
What I would say that is in response to the fees showing up in one place and after they disappear from another, one of consumer advocates' favorite metaphors is that this is like playing whack-a-mole, right? That once you limit one area, that's just going to come up somewhere else. So that obviously is an issue, and the banks would say that they are a company and that they are there's nothing wrong with charging for the service that they're providing to consumers, which is loaning them money sometimes in a very risky situation.
If you want to read more about the financial goings-on on Capitol Hill and across the country, you can read it in the Washington Post. Ylan Mui is our guest and is one of the authors. And if you're at the University of Maryland and want to take a course in journalism, you can find her teaching at the University of Maryland College Park. Thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you.